Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Paddock Talk podcast. Today, we're bringing you our reaction and review of the Bahrain Grand Prix. It was a great race where we saw Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton have a race-long scrap, and it's exactly the type of thing that us F1 fans have been waiting for. We saw a glimpse of it in pre-season, we saw it confirmed in qualifying, and we just really got what everyone was asking for, really, in this race. Lewis and Max head-to-head. Never separated by more than a few seconds, and it all came to boils in the last few laps where Verstappen caught up to Lewis but overtook him off the track, which I'm sure we'll get into later. Bit controversial, but for me this was a really good race. I felt like the first half there was just constant action with overtakes. We had some great battles, like Sainz. I think it was Sainz, Vettel, and Alonso. That was a really good scrap, and there's just constant action throughout the field, and we got that really not satisfying conclusion, because I think Max overtaking Lewis would have been a 10 out of 10. But for me, this is a 9 out of 10 and a really good season opening. We know Bahrain's a good track for overtaking, but this race, 9 out of 10 for me, I'd say. What about you guys?
Yeah, I was really happy with the race and how it went out in the end. I think, obviously, the Hamilton-Verstappen, that battle was very good. Well, obviously, I wouldn't say very good, tell a lie. I'd say it was pretty good. Maybe a little bit of a letdown in the end. We only got a bit of side-by-side for barely a sector, really. But I'd say the strategical war behind it, with the total mind games both Red Bull and Mercedes were playing against each other by pitting Bottas and Hamilton and so on. It was a really good race, and obviously all the midfield battles up and down the field. I think overall, I don't think you can ask for much more from a race which doesn't have, people crashing every 2 laps or spinning out.
Yeah, I think this race is really needed for the sports, for the fans, for both Red Bull and for Mercedes as well, because the battle that we've all wanted, it happened in qualifying and also in the race as well. And yeah, it was more strategical, and then we've got the battle in the last 5 laps, which were really tense, and Lewis pulled off an emphatic victory, in my opinion.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that race. It was a solid 9 out of 10 for me as season openers go. We are used to the boredom of Australia, but Bahrain provided something special. It's since 2014, since the race went to a nighttime, it really has brought it to life. We saw the Formula 2 in the morning for the feature race, based in the daytime, and you did notice a substantial difference between the two. And it's exactly what the sport needed, as Dill said. A battle between Mercedes and Red Bull, two cars fighting out in different teams for the win, going down to the last lap. And it was a really nice element because we had the strategic element of Mercedes triggering the undercut, Red Bull then electing not to pit the lap after, go longer, and then be on the back foot and chasing back against Mercedes. And then that kind of converged all into one at the end, with Verstappen and Hamilton going wheel to wheel, what we've wanted for ages since Max kind of entered the top team. We've had flashes, but it's mainly been either Mercedes having the best car over the season and Red Bull kind of only picking up in a few races. And when they have, like Mexico and Brazil, for example, Verstappen has had the superior car, so it's not really been an equal fight. Whereas I think yesterday, when the race happened, as we're recording this, they did have equal machinery, I'd say. Maybe marginally, Red Bull were quicker, because in qualifying they were mile ahead. Verstappen was on pole by 4/10. But I did expect Mercedes to bounce back come race day, and they did, and it was just a thrilling race from start to finish. Really enjoyed that one.
And if we get onto that Mercedes versus Red Bull battle, we're going to go through all the teams and talk about them, but obviously Mercedes and Red Bull at the top. And we're going to get into that now. You talk about Max's strategy, but I was slightly confused about Red Bull's strategy. Like you say, Mercedes triggered the undercut, but then they just left Max out there, and they were sort of 5 seconds behind, and then they were never really sort of looking to challenge. And then Hamilton was about 8 seconds ahead on the last stint and had older tyres, but it's just a very bizarre strategy from Red Bull. And yes, on that one undercut, on that one outlap from Hamilton, he would have jumped Verstappen. But at least you give him a fair chance there. And I think on an equal strategy, or on the exact same strategy, Max and Red Bull do win that. But we'll get to the main talking point of the race, which is unfortunately track limits. As everyone I'm sure knows, listening to this, Verstappen overtook Hamilton around the outside of turn 4 with all 4 wheels off the track. Now, I think a lot of the frustration from Verstappen and Red Bull fans comes from the fact Hamilton was using that line, all 4 wheels off the track, for 29. I think if someone counted it all and showed it on Twitter, 29 of the 56 laps was he was going off the track every time, and that's acceptable. Or he only gets a warning after 25 times doing it, but then when Max does it, it's not allowed, and that's I think where the frustration lies. But one key thing to take into consideration is no matter what the grey areas around track limits about someone track extending by themselves, you can never overtake someone off the track. And some will say as well that Verstappen already had the move done. He was 90% ahead of Hamilton and then got a bit of oversteer and went wide. But he was only there in the first place because he'd taken that extra speed and he was always using that line. And again, there's now been on boards of Ocon, and he went all 4 wheels off the track. But he actually overtook Tsunoda at turn 5. So that's fine. So I can understand where Verstappen fans are frustrated. And I think it is down to the FIA. They need to be more consistent, because usually, or we saw last year, you get, what is it, like three extends at one corner, and then you get another warning, and then you get a black and white flag, and then you get a 5-second penalty. There wasn't that for Hamilton. They just sort of didn't really count. And then they saw him doing it basically all the time. They were like, all right, you should probably stop doing that now. So I do agree from the FIA that's not great. But I do think that he should have given the place back. It was the right thing to do. And then by that time, he'd used the best of his tyres. What are your guys' thoughts on the track extending stuff?
Yeah, it's a shame that it seems like we can never go through a full weekend without the track limits debate coming in. And I think, unfortunately, we just need to have that set black and white rule where it's obviously, if you're using all 4 wheels off the track to overtake someone, that's obviously a flat out no-no. And obviously, if you keep the position after that, then you should get penalised. But I think when it comes to doing it on your own, there should be sort of like a 3 strikes and a penalty kind of system implemented, really. Just like a kind of consistency that discourages people pushing their luck like Hamilton did, doing it nearly 30 times. I think there just needs to be that consistency to say, look, you can only do it so many times, and if you do it any more than that, then you get penalised. And just set the bar straight and make sure no one really just abuses the rules.
Looking at it from Lewis's perspective, if your motorsport is a sport of the finest of margins, and if you're going to gain like a couple of tenths from going wide and you're going to get away with it, then of course you're going to continue doing it. And the FIA, the stewards just did not put their foot down and stop it. And they just, Lewis just continued doing it. Unfortunately, that's just really the argument at the moment. If the FIA are not going to be consistent, then it's just going to keep becoming a problem. They just need to put their foot down more, in my opinion.
It all boils down to consistency, and I mean, they said before the weekend they weren't going to look at track limits, and then they changed their mind again and said turn 4 was off limits, but not for the race. And so that kind of set a precedent. So you're thinking, okay, we know the rules heading into the weekend. In the race, they won't be pleased. And I saw an interesting thread from, I think it's Sam Collins, that he had a look at like every lap of Verstappen and Hamilton. And Hamilton, for the first half of the race, was entirely going wide at turn 4. Red Bull clocked it and got onto Verstappen, and Verstappen started doing it. Then the FIA came on to Hamilton and Mercedes and told him to stop abusing the track limits as he was. So he reverted to doing his usual line. Red Bull then communicated that to Verstappen, and he was like still abusing the limits, but not as much as Hamilton. and within the confines of what was allowed. And it boils down to the point of, if the drivers don't know what the rules are, how on earth are the fans meant to know? We just need consistency. They need to outlaw black and white like rules, what you can do, what you can't do for the whole weekend, and leave it at that. Because at the moment it's so unclear every weekend what the track limits actually are.
Exactly, and I think as well the frustration comes down to last year. I remember at Imola, I think it was, and Portimao, they had those rules. They had, if you go off the track at turn 8 or whatever 3 times, you will get a black and white flag, and then you'll get a penalty. I remember Stroll got a penalty at Portimao last year for abusing track limits at turn 1, and so why are they now not using that rule? And it's like they've had 3 days of testing in FP1, and then they've gone, all right, we're going to start doing it now, and then they've gone, all right, now we're not doing it in the race though. So I'm just like, where's the logic there? Just pick one of the two and stick to it, not go, oh, it's all right sometimes, and then, oh, but you can't do it now. Like you say,
Yeah,
if
it's very
the confusion
wish-washy.
doesn't help anyone. Exactly. Just, and that's why fans are confused. They don't know what's going on. But I mean, track limits is one thing, but like you say, overtaking someone off the track is unacceptable in any kind of rule book. And I think it was unfortunate. And a lot of Verstappen fans and Red Bull fans felt robbed. And I think it's because they know as well deep down this. I don't think Max bottled it or Red Bull bottled it, but this was kind of their race to lose. And Hamilton showed his worth. All over the winter. Oh, we don't need him. Let's just get Russell in. Hamilton just showed his worth in race 1 to Mercedes and said, this is why you've hired me, because look where Bottas was. I know he had a slow stop and ended up doing another pit stop for fastest lap, but he was still, not far off. If Russell and Bottas are in that car, for example, Verstappen still wins that race. So Hamilton, showing that somehow still has critics and is showing them up. But we will move on now to the next team, McLaren. They had a very solid race, to be fair. They were third fastest pretty much throughout the whole weekend, consistently at least. And Lando Norris got his elbows out. Him and Ricciardo lap 1 were side by side for much of that, and I thought that could have ended in tears. But Norris finished in 4th pretty convincingly as well, and Ricciardo finished down in 7th. And it's just very, very quite under the radar. They're just solidly third now, and Norris and Ricciardo both just sort of got on with it, and especially Norris has had a really, really good race.
Yeah, McLaren had a really good outing. I think, Norris 4th, that's a real statement from Norris. I think loads of people thought coming into the season that Ricciardo was going to comfortably cruise past Norris. And although that may change over the season, Norris has certainly put out a statement to Ricciardo saying, look, it's not going to be as easy as what you think. Ricciardo, in talking to Ricciardo, he had a good debut race. I think, it's adapting to a new team. It can be tricky for some drivers. Maybe that's the case, but a 7th place, it's still a very respectable finish overall. And obviously, he was giving Leclerc a run for his money just right at the end.
Yeah, I agree with both of you. I think that McLaren had a very solid race, and Lando Norris, he really has a thing for doing well at the first race. He went completely under the radar. Thinking about it, he came P4, and yeah, just a very solid drive in general, and just they can only improve from here, really.
Yeah, McLaren's qualifying pace was actually quite disappointing, considering all the hype around them, and showed really good pace in testing and in free practice. But they got to qualify and they kind of just seemed to disappear. I don't know if the two drivers didn't get their laps together. I fail to believe that. I just don't think the car was in the optimum window, and Leclerc and Gasly put in stellar laps to pip them. But yeah, come race day, they were far and away probably the third best team. Ferrari kind of kept them honest, and the pit stops did kind of bring others closer. The undercut was really powerful this weekend. But in general, McLaren did seem to have that edge on race trim, and Norris did a great job. Once he passed Leclerc, he kind of didn't look back, and he was in a solid P4 race. Managed to be the only other midfield driver not to be overtaken by Perez on his comeback from the pit lane. And he did the feat that many people didn't think he'd do in beating Ricciardo. So fair play to him, and it's just whether you can keep up, because the last 2 seasons he's kind of dropped off after the opening part of the season. So he just needs to work on maintaining that consistency. But he's only 21, he's still young, and he's still developing. So I'm sure with time that will come. And with someone like Ricciardo pushing him, I'm sure he'll only improve further from here.
And I'm sorry, but sorry to all the Perez fans out there, but I did forget to talk about him when we're doing Red Bull and Mercedes. So we'll just quickly go back to Perez. When I saw, they changed his engine, I think, or changed some parts of his engine before he went out to the race, and then broke down, and that just went completely dead on the formation lap, and he somehow got it back and started from the pit lane. And you've just got to say fair play again. He came through the field, made some good moves in a car that he's not overly comfortable with, or he's not uncomfortable. He doesn't know exactly like the maximum he can get out of the brakes, or where he can really throw the car around. And I did kind of feel like we used to discredit, an Albon or whatever if he came through the back of the field, starting from last or whatever, and you say, oh, he's overtaking an Alfa Romeo. Yeah, he should be. But for Perez to recover like that, I just really, really hope he has just one of those weekends where he qualifies in 4th, and he's just solidly in and around the hunt for the podiums, and he's not constantly doing recovery drives because he didn't get it together in qualifying. But I was pretty impressed with what Perez had to offer.
Yeah, Perez did quite good, I'd say. I think he did have some bad luck. Obviously, right before the start of the race, his engine just decided to shut off for some reason. Obviously, as you said, he changed the parts before. Going back to his qualifying was quite poor, obviously, coming P11. Even though I think it is all his own fault for that, really, because he was a bit cocky trying to set a lap on the mediums, even though he probably should have just gone for the softs. There's a safe bet. Really good comeback drive for him. Overtaking a lot of cars isn't an easy feat, whether you're in a Mercedes or a Red Bull or whatever. So I think overall, for a debut race, coming P5 from last, I think it's a good outing. Hopefully, come Imola, he's on the pace and being able to support Verstappen a bit better.
I think it was a solid debut for Perez. Not as good as people are trying to make it out. Like, don't get me wrong, he's in a Red Bull and he got to P5, fair enough. But I think part of the reason why Red Bull lost that race yesterday was because they didn't have that chess piece that Mercedes were using with Bottas with strategy. They made it more 2 Mercedes versus 1 Red Bull, which overall led to the outcome of Hamilton winning. So in next few races, I do want to see Perez in the top 4 more, making it 2 Red Bulls versus 2 Mercedes. But yeah, that's really all I have to say on that matter.
I disagree with the bit on Perez being the reason Max didn't win. I don't think that really had any bearing. Merck tried to use Bottas to kind of split strategy and put pressure on Red Bull, but the botched pit stop that Bottas had kind of put paid to that, and he wasn't a factor at all. It was kind of directly a fight between Verstappen and Hamilton, and Red Bull. I think they pitted the extra few laps after Hamilton on the first stop, because we've seen how powerful the undercut is, and if they'd have brought him in the next lap, I'm pretty sure Hamilton would have been directly behind Verstappen, and it could have got very close between them. So I think Red Bull's thinking was, if we go longer, have the fresher tyres at the end, we have the pace advantage to catch and pass, and I think that was kind of their thinking. So although the strategy looks dubious now because they didn't win, in the moment it probably was their safest bet, and it was actually quite a clever strategy to just not panic and react and pit the lap straight after. But on Perez, I actually think it was a good drive, because although we have seen Albon in 2019 do recovery drives from the back of the grid, last year, I think if he'd started at the back, he probably would have only got up to like P8. The fact that Perez got to and it wasn't as like a calm race of Perez. He had that on the formation lap, his car broke down, probably lots of panic going through his head, and then literally he had to go to the end of the pit lane and focus himself at the start. And to climb up to P5 and only finish 6 seconds, I think, behind Norris in P4, with a bit more luck, if Norris and the McLaren, if the field, Perez would have easily got himself up to P4. Maybe saying what a brilliant drive that was, but because he finished behind Norris in P5, but people are kind of saying, well, it's not that great. He didn't help Red Bull at all. But Perez's main thing is race pace. His qualifying pace is never going to match Verstappen. So as long as he can just kind of get into Q3, always be like fourth on the grid, they can then utilize how good he is on a Sunday. And we know how good Perez is on his tires. So if there's one guy that can stretch out a stint and play a big role in like blocking Mercedes or forcing them to do something different on strategy, it's Perez. So I think he needs time because he's not had long in the car. And ultimately his fight is against Bottas. It's not with Max. So as long as he just steadily improves with the next few races and establishes himself as a solid number 2, I think he'll be fine.
And now we move on to Aston Martin, probably the most disappointing team to come out of Bahrain, really. Otmar now sounds pretty angry in the media that the rules have meant the low rate cars are now struggling more. I mean, I don't know why all of a sudden the media now love talking about rake. I really don't think. I mean, sure, it's had some say in the matter, but it's not. All the reasons why Mercedes or Aston Martin are struggling, but it's no doubt that Aston Martin or Racing Point last year had a very similar car to Mercedes, and therefore they're going to have the same kind of struggles that Mercedes are now having. Lance Stroll finished in 10th after a pretty decent effort from him, but he was in and around the top 10 all race and just sort of fell away on the last stint on hards. And Sebastian Vettel, down in 15th in the end, tried to do a one-stop, recovered from. I mean, he was up to 14th after starting last, up to 14th, and he had quite a lot of action. He had a few battles here and there, but when fighting with Esteban Ocon in the Alpine, he says that Ocon changed lines, but it just seemed that Vettel ended up being directly behind Ocon and just going straight into the back of him. Similar to what he did to Verstappen in 2019 at Silverstone. And I don't know if anyone watched F2, but similarly with Schwartzman and Nissany, just a car directly in front of him and locking up and hitting the back of it. As we all know, the cars lose a lot of downforce when you're behind another one. I saw, Taylor, you were quite critical of Vettel. Obviously, you're quite a big Vettel fan, so it's so difficult because I don't want to say, oh, he's finished, he's washed. What a mistake from Aston Martin, but it's not a good look at all. And the Aston Martin not as good as Vettel and Stroll would have hoped for it to be. And it's just disappointing. I just hope he can. Well, that's the thing. You say you hope he can improve, but this was meant to be where he's improving, or he's not meant to be making these errors anymore. Now he's not in a Ferrari or whatever. But it's just disappointment, really. And there's still hope somewhere in me that I do believe he's going to turn it around, but it's starting to fade quite a lot now.
It's getting harder and harder to defend him. I know you mentioned my name there, so I thought I'll jump in here and give my thoughts. As you said, this was meant to be the reset. At Ferrari, I've heard before, it might have been Leclerc that said it, I'm not quite sure, but the Ferrari is quite poor in dirty air because these cars the top cars aren't designed to run in dirty air. I don't know if you recall in 2016, there was that whole fiasco with Hamilton. Whenever he had a bad start and fell into the pack, he'd take a while to come through because that Mercedes wasn't good in dirty air. Because the top team, and Ferrari were aiming to be a top team in 2020, don't make any mistake about it, they designed a car that could go as fast as possible, and that is in clean air. So when it hit dirty air, the car is unstable, and that's kind of what happened with Vettel at Silverstone 2019. He got into the back of Verstappen, the exact same incident as Bahrain. He did it at the Nürburgring last year. So it's 3 years on the bounce. He's done the same mistake and hasn't seemed to learn his lesson, which is a really worrying thing. And this is a 4-time world champion. Like, we can't beat around the bush and act like he's a rookie or he's a new driver. This is a guy that's the third most successful man in the sport. And as good as Stroll is, and he is better than people give him credit for, Vettel should be putting him away from the outset, regardless of it being a new car. And he was kind of off the pace all weekend, even when he was running in practice. Stroll had the edge. in qualifying after the first run, Stroll had the edge, and Vettel's pacing the race. He got up to P14 off the start, but that was as good as it got. And he didn't seem to improve from there. And no other driver on the grid is making the errors he's making. That's the worrying thing for me, is he's not learning from them. He's committing the exact same errors almost every other week. And at what point do you say he's not got it anymore? I mean, I'm at that point now where I think it might be over for him. I probably will give him one more chance in 22, see what the new regs are like, whether they suit him any better, because these ones clearly are wasted on him. But yeah, it's not looking good. And if he does lose to Stroll this season, that'll be his third teammate he's lost to. He would have never beaten a team that's younger than him. And it's not a good look for his legacy at all.
Yeah, I'm just going to go back to what Tom said at the beginning when he was speaking about Aston Martin, talking about the low rake. We're on the low rake stuff. I do find it ironic seeing Schaffnauer complaining about the disadvantages of low rake, given that a low rake car was pretty much won the championship the last few years. But overall, as Aston Martin really disappointed. Vettel, as you guys were saying before, it is weird seeing him struggle that much, making a few rocky mistakes. I still think it's too early to write him off fully. I think obviously bad days happen to everyone, and I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt. So I think, over time, I'm sure he's going to adapt to the Aston Martin. I really don't understand really the mistake he made with Ocon. It was quite strange, but it happens. Stroll did a really good race. Not a good race, I'll tell a lie. He, did what he could with the Aston Martin. It's been struggling all weekend quite clearly. So to score points for Aston Martin on their first weekend back in Formula One, I think that's a good step for them. But obviously, it's not where they really wanted to be this weekend, considering all the hype around them. And as well, the talk from Schaffnauer earlier on in the season saying that they were aiming for podiums right from the get-go. So I think a P10 and it was a P15, I believe, a P10 and a P15 on your first race for the season for a team aiming to be podiums is very, very underwhelming.
Going into pre-season, I did expect Aston Martin to be up there with McLaren and Ferrari this season, but overall, Bahrain, they were the biggest disappointment. Stroll, I think he had a good race. He had a solid race, finishing P10, just doing the best that he could. And with Vettel, I have my utmost respect for him. He's an absolute champion. But like ever since 2018, you could just really feel like it's gone downhill. And I don't want to be reactionary and say that it's over, but it's just not looking good. Like first day at the office, and he's gone into the back of Ocon like that. But yeah, just hoping you can recover from that, and only Aston Martin can get better and move upwards into the midfield a bit more.
Indeed. So now we move on to Alpine, their debut as well. And well, we'll go into the weekend. It was maybe they're not that good. Maybe they're towards the back of the midfield. And we did kind of see that they were just on the periphery Ocon finished down in 13th in the end after that contact with Seb. And I mean, he wasn't really anywhere during the race, really. He blames the yellow flags for his lack of pace in Q1 exit in qualifying. But even then, I don't think the yellow flags actually did make a difference. And he was just not that quick. And Alonso retired after brake issue with the brake overheating, apparently a sandwich wrapper. Happened to Sorokin a few years ago, so these things do happen. But I mean, I was pleasantly surprised by Alonso. I thought he was he got into Q3 somehow and was scrapping away on the first lap and was up to 7th at one point. And I just thought, you know what, fair play. This guy's been out of the game for 2 years. We saw with older people who take a step out like a Schumacher when he came back, or Kimi when he came back, just take a little bit to get back into it. But he seems to be ready from the get-go, even with a broken jaw. And yeah, I was really, really impressed with him. I thought, just fair play. I mean, the Alpine doesn't look particularly quick. And Alonso said he was struggling with the rear a few times during quali and Friday and stuff. But yeah, I mean, that's all there is. That's all there is to it, really. I don't really know what to add from that.
Yeah, I think Alpine should be quite disappointed with how the weekend went. I think, don't get me wrong, Alonso did really, really good for the team and getting the car into Q3, and he did quite surprise me because I didn't think he would really be off the block so quickly. But obviously, it's just really unlucky about the sandwich bag that obviously just ruined the brake ducts. But yeah, no, Alonso could have easily scored points today, and I think quite unlucky not to. In regards to Ocon, obviously had a disappointing qualifying on Saturday, being knocked out in Q1, which was a bit of a surprise given that everyone thought that this would be the year that we would really sort of see him, bounce back. And in the race as well, he made a good, had a good few laps, but was sort of lingering around just outside the top 10 for a little bit. And then obviously got involved in that tangle with Vettel, which sort of obviously ruined his race a little bit. But I think overall, Alpine, quite a letdown. I was expecting them to be a little bit better, if I'm being honest, but I think there's promising signs of Alonso getting that car into Q3. I think it's going to be interesting for them. I'm sure they'll be able to develop throughout the season, but at the moment, yeah, it's not the best.
I'll tell you what, I do definitely respect Alonso more than I did before them for getting that car into Q3. He really ran it back, and yeah, not really much to say on Alpine. Ocon, his race was ruined by Vettel, and then Alonso, the issue obviously that causes his race to end. But just looking forward to see how they do in the coming races.
Yeah, that car is slow. Let's not make a mistake. That car is slow. It's probably the slowest in the midfield. Provided we're not counting, I don't know if we're counting Alfa Romeo in the midfield. I presume we are, so maybe it's not the slowest. Especially down the straights. I'm pretty sure Alpine are running a similar Renault engine to last year. I don't think there's been much alteration to it, which would kind of make sense because they did seem to be lacking top speed. Yeah, even compared to Ferrari, Ferrari seem to have like a stronger engine package than them this weekend. I don't know if it's to do with the conditions or what, but they certainly weren't quick down the straights. And fair play to Alonso, as you all said. It's typical Alonso. I didn't really expect any. I thought he might drop off a bit, but I didn't really expect any different. It's just typical Fernando Alonso. He'll always deliver the maximum, no matter how long he's been out the car. Ragged, and throughout the season, he could genuinely, if that car improves, which I'm not sure if it will, because to me, I'm kind of getting the vibes that they're focusing all on 2022. Because Alonso, although he's only just come back and it doesn't make sense for him to throw a fuss, he does seem very, very relaxed. Like even when the car had that rear duct brake failure or problems, and he was even complimentary of Vettel, someone that he hasn't always spoken well about. Like he said, he really enjoyed the battle with him. So I've got a feeling that Alonso's kind of just buying his time and knowing that Alpine are focusing all their resources in 2022 because it doesn't really make sense that they've dropped so far from last year to this year, even though the field is close. And it's worrying times for Ocon because this was his time to lay down a marker because he's fighting for his drive this year because Alpine they've got 3 academy members who are looking good. Guanyu Zhou leads the championship in F2. Piastri won a race and looked really solid in the feature race. He tangled. And then Lundgaard is also, he was a front-running contender last year. And although his weekend wasn't the best by any means, in the remaining rounds, he will surely bounce back and be a championship contender again. And then you've got Pierre Gasly also, who we'll get on to later, who's linked to that seat. So Ocon, with Alonso's contract watershed or watertight, he's really got to perform and get knocked out in Q1 regardless of the yellow flags, and then being pretty much nowhere in the race. He didn't really make much progress even before Vettel took him out. He's really got to get his foot into gear and start matching Alonso, otherwise he's gone.
Agree with that. So moving on, we now have Ferrari, and pretty solid from them, really. We had Leclerc in 6th in the end and Sainz in 8th. Double points finish, which were a bit of a rarity last year. And they seem to be well established at the top of the midfield. Exactly the step they wanted from last year. The engines seemed to be fine. And Leclerc was up into P3 at one point. He was starting on the softs, but feisty as ever on the first few laps from Leclerc and ended up, as he did last year, a little bit dropping back to the pecking order. But I was impressed with Leclerc. Again, another superb qualifying lap as well. I need to mention that got him 4th, wasn't it? So yeah, really, really impressed with Leclerc as always. And Sainz said he was a bit too cautious into the first corner and the first few corners, which lost him a place. But again, just had some good scraps. Got into 8th, only finished 1.1 seconds off Ricciardo as well. And again, I was impressed with Sainz. It's first ever race for Ferrari, and this duo could do good things. I mean, depending on the rate of development and how they fare, I mean, they could sneak third in the championship, which would be a good step to recovery for them. Obviously, not where Ferrari need to be in the long term, but a solid year in and around the upper midfield, the 5th, 6th, 7th, those kind of positions, 4th, around that area would be good for Ferrari. And I was pleasantly surprised by both of them.
Yeah, Ferrari were one of the big surprises for me over this weekend. I didn't think they'd be getting the double points finish, if I'm being honest. Obviously, Leclerc doing what he does best and dragging the hell out of that Ferrari to a really good qualifying position really sort of got people very optimistic about their chances. The race itself, I don't think they can complain about where they've come. I think it's a massive improvement from last year. Getting a double points finish, the first one since Istanbul last year. Leclerc showing very good race pace throughout. Just doing what he does best, and that's just being a very top driver who gets the most out of his machinery. Sainz, on the other hand, good debut from him. Getting a P8. It's a very good result. Strong. It's quite good for the team, and I think bagging them points as well. Obviously, considering they're going to be in the fight for third. It's just overall a really good performance from them, and it's probably quite a morale boost for the team as well, knowing that they can fight with the upper midfield this season.
Last year being their worst Constructors' Championship finish in 40 years, as a Ferrari fan, you'd think that it can only get better, and that's exactly what happened. They were never going to be challenging at the front, so I think where they are now, they can be happy with at the moment. Leclerc, we've seen this pattern over the last 2 years. Like, he has pulled out results out of the bag, like Austria in the race, and then on top of that, Silverstone in the race, and then also Bahrain qualifying as well. So I think Leclerc can be happy, and then Sainz as well. Very solid debut from him. And yeah, hopefully they can challenge for third, because I think Ferrari need to be up there, to be honest.
Yeah, Leclerc, he's on the back foot all weekend. It actually seemed like Sainz had the edge, and Leclerc only had one fresh tyre run in Q3. And yet he still pulled out the bag when he needed to and put 6 tenths on Sainz's head and got P4, which nobody expected. And in the race, he got up to P3, slipped back behind Bottas, as to be expected. Then Norris passed him. It does seem that Ferrari, again, they've not worked on their Achilles heel on the softer compounded tyre in race trim. They do seem to have a lot of degradation issues compared to the other teams, and it's baffling that this has been an issue since 2018 and they've still not got on top of it. So while it's much easier to get to the front of the midfield than it is to reach the top, which is pretty obvious. And if they get to that point again against Mercedes or Red Bull, that's something they need to iron out. And the fact they've not noticed, I don't know if they noticed it or if they're not able to find a fix for it now in the 4th year is very worrying. And I think we need to be careful in overstating Ferrari's improvement. They obviously have improved, but this is Ferrari. It's not like a midfield team like an Alfa Romeo or something making a jump from being at the back of the midfield to the front in one winter. This is Ferrari, and no matter the cost cap, the resource they have at Maranello, this is the minimum you'd be expecting of a team like Ferrari. And the big jump now we've seen Renault before, they've jumped to the front of the midfield. All you need to do is just make a very clean package, and you can be at the front of that midfield, a very efficient package. It's then taking that leap towards Mercedes and Red Bull, which is always the hardest part, and that's where Renault have so far come unstuck, and now turning into Alpine. So it'll be interesting to see where Ferrari go from here. It's a very promising step for them, and Sainz being in the fight for points, and like Vettel was last year, is huge, because against McLaren, they're going to need 2 top drivers, because we already know Norris is established now. Ricciardo is definitely an established name, race winner. So those 2 teams go neck and neck all season. It'll be so exciting to see for fans. And it's going to fluctuate between races, because Bahrain wasn't one of Ferrari's strongest tracks. They've even admitted it, and that probably comes down to the engine power. They've improved that area, but still lagging behind the likes of Mercedes power in the McLaren. And so at Imola, I'm actually expecting big things from Ferrari, and they should be aiming to be the clear third team there.
Compared to last year, do you think this is a good enough improvement, Taylor?
Oh yeah, no, undoubtedly it's a good enough improvement because at the end of the day they came sixth in the constructors last year, and they were never going to challenge Mercedes or Red Bull with the limitations on development. So that their goal had to be for challenging for third. But as I've said before, we have to be careful in like glorifying how good Ferrari are now or how good of a step it is when it should be the bare minimum. They shouldn't have even slipped back to P6 last year. They should be challenging for championships every year. So the fact that we're now saying how good P3 is or challenging for P3 is and finishing P6 and P8 in a race, it shows how far the standards have fallen. So we do need to be careful in hyping them up to that extent.
Exactly, the sport does need Ferrari at the front.
Absolutely. Moving on to the good vibes team, AlphaTauri. They just seem to be everyone's second favorite team at the moment. They just seem to be very, with Tsunoda and Gasly, they just seem to be having lots of fun and very, very solid package. Gasly qualified very, very well in fifth, I want to say, fifth, sixth, somewhere around there.
Yeah, it's fifth.
And which is actually good because I predicted Gasly to finish fifth. But unfortunately, he did lose his front wing on the back of Ricciardo on the safety car restart, which dropped him at the back, and he never really recovered and ended up retiring in the pits. It's a bit unfortunate for him, but the other driver, Yuki Tsunoda, I mean, I think people have been saying it, but I think it is true. I mean, he is a very exciting, typical Japanese driver who is just going to absolutely send it. And he did do a couple of absolutely outrageous moves into turn one, you know, diving miles back on Alonso. And well, he said in the interview afterwards, you know, he idolizes Alonso, and to be doing that on his hero, you know, Alonso made his debut when Tsunoda was about 6 months old. So I was really impressed with him. There was a part of me when he got signed that I thought this is too early for him. You know, he's way too raw. But when you look at a certain other rookie in the field this year, you go, actually, no, you know, he's clearly got immense speed and talent. And I'm excited to see what he can do. We saw in Q1, he stuck second, obviously. You know, people are not going to have second runs, but whatever. But the minute shows he has serious pace, and he didn't quite get Q2 together, and did unfortunately go out in Q2. And he also missed his grid spot as well because Perez was in the pits, and he overshot it and had to reverse. I don't know how anyone didn't see that, but that happened, and he got away with it and fell down in lap one as well. But yeah, just drove really, really nicely. Had some epic fights and battles and overtakes, and finished P9 in the end. And I think he's just going to build on that. I think he's also quite intelligent and will, you know, learn and look at the data and see where he can improve. And I'm excited what AlphaTauri can do. I don't want to do a Imola preview, but they were very good there last year, so I think they could be very good there in 3 weeks' time as well.
Yeah, AlphaTauri, I think they'll be a little disappointed by this weekend only scoring 2 points from it. Gasly, it was a big shame for him, really, getting that front wing damage really early on in the race and later retiring. I think Gasly really could have stuck it in the top 5, top 6 maybe. He did seem to have that speed. Moving on to Tsunoda, you know, there's been a lot of critics questioning whether he was ready to make the step up, but I think the performance he made today was really kind of silenced those critics. Coming P9 in your first race. Last time a driver did that, I believe, was Stoffel van Dorn back in 2016. You know, had a rough start, to be fair. I think he dropped quite a fair few places down. I think he was down in P17, P16 at one point, I believe. But worked his way back up through the field and came P9. So I think, you know, a very good outing from him overall. And I think AlphaTauri will be very excited about the prospect of Imola, which, as you said, Tom, was a very strong track for them last year.
In Q1 and Q2, you could definitely hear the excitement and shock from Martin Brundle and David Croft when commentating over AlphaTauri. And I agree with both of you. They are a really exciting team. I think they'll be very disappointed with this weekend only getting 2 points, but overall, the shining light of the weekend, in my opinion, was Yuki Tsunoda. Like, for a driver that had only 2 years of international single-seater experience, he drove brilliantly and finishing ninth. I'm not sure many people saw that he overtook Stroll on the last lap as well. So I think overall he will be very happy. It's just a confidence booster, just building experience as well. And Gasly, quite unlucky, but he can build on that easily. He's a great driver.
the midfield is all about fine margins, and AlphaTauri will be ruining not scoring more than 2 points because they had the pace for such a strong result this weekend. And while their car does look good and the engine package looks brilliant, and opportunities will come again, there's 22 more races. It's like Haas in Australia in 2018. That ultimately cost them finishing P4, and so you do wonder at the end of the season how much it could cost AlphaTauri, especially with how tight that midfield is, as I said. Gasly, it was actually a real shame they got that incident with Ricciardo. It was like such a marginal incident. And the main issue was he was starting on the mediums, which was the long game, and everyone else was on the soft. So on that restart, the two McLarens had the grip on the softs, and they went straight past him, and he just kind of got an unlucky clip in his front wing. Maybe a bit of an error on his part not to spot that. It's very harsh to judge him on that, but obviously it's fine margins. And it would have been interesting to see where Gasly would have come, because AlphaTauri did have great pace in full throughout practice and then throughout qualifying. And if he'd have been there for the long game on those mediums, he would have been right in between the McLaren Ferrari battle, and he could have easily got a top 5, maybe a top 6 result out of all of that. And then Yuki Tsunoda, what a talent this guy is. The fact he can just jump straight into an F1 car after 2 years of international single-seater experience, and normally it takes us a while for them to get up to speed, but he was right on the speed from minute 1 of testing. Obviously, testing, you don't take the times too much, but you could see he was comfortable in that cockpit. And some of the moves he pulled off at the end, the move on Alonso, the move on Stroll, he has no fear. And if that's his first race weekend, I'm so excited to see what else he can do, because this kid is a serious talent, and there's no doubt in my mind he's going to be in a Red Bull car sooner rather than later.
We just have to hope that Red Bull they make the right decisions with Tsunoda, really, because he does seem like a very, very exciting talent.
It all depends on Perez. If Perez can be that good stopgap they want, then they can give Yuki Tsunoda all the time he needs to develop and be ready for when the time comes. Because potentially, if Red Bull have a championship contending car now, but if Hamilton goes in the next few years and Mercedes do seek Verstappen, he makes that move to Mercedes, which on the basis of the last few years, you wouldn't bet against him doing that. Red Bull, they could have that ready-made replacement in Tsunoda coming through their ranks already, which is perfect for them, because recently their driver academy has been a bit dry, and that's why they've been having to call back drivers like Kvyat from the sidelines. Whereas now they've got Tsunoda in F1, they've got 3 good drivers in F2, Daruvala, Vips, and Lawson. So that the Red Bull academy is really thriving again now.
For sure.
And the next team then is Alfa Romeo, and I think they probably surprised the fans and probably the people in the paddock as well. I know Russell said he was quite surprised by their pace, and they just had pretty solid 11th and 12th for them. Kimi Raikkonen missing out on the points by just 2 seconds in the end from Lance Stroll, and I think they can be pretty pleased. They've clearly taken a step forward from last year, and yeah, I mean, if they want to be getting getting into that top 10. But I think they can be pretty pleased what they've seen this weekend.
Yeah, it's a mixed bag for Alfa Romeo this weekend. I think on the upside for them, it's quite clear that they've sort of broke free from the Group C sort of class with Haas and Williams, and they do seem to be in that lower midfield fight. You know, maybe even just a general midfield. They were giving it to some of what was deemed to be some of the upper midfield teams like Aston Martin. You know, I don't think they could really be too upset coming. It was it? I'm right in saying P12 and P13. Sorry, it's P11, P12. I think yeah, it's a good result for them, and I think they'll be quite confident coming into the coming races, and that they might be able to bag some points and hopefully secure themselves in 8th place, and maybe even 7th place. You never know.
Nothing much to really say on Alfa Romeo. They can only improve, and they should be happy with P11 and P12. Just hopefully they can get into that midfield battle, I guess, which is really looking good this year, to be honest.
It's all about perception as well with Alfa Romeo. I actually feel like they've been the victims of the midfield being so close. Like their car, they adopted the slimmer front nose cone that most of the grid have run now for a couple of years. The Ferrari engine needs to be a substantial step forward. And I feel that if this was their car in the 2019 or 2020 grid, they'd actually be getting they'd be in the points more often than they probably will be this year. And they've been the victims of the midfield group being so close. But in terms of how much they were able to develop the car over the winter, they've actually made a really big step forward. Ross said they'd be the surprise of the season, and I think Bahrain proved that. Both cars comfortably through to Q2. They were marginally slower than Stroll, I think, in qualifying in Q2. I'm not quite sure what the gaps were, but I don't think they were that far off getting into Q3. So considering where they were last year, Alfa Romeo done wonders to improve that much, and they've got a solid driver lineup. They've only one of 3 teams out of the 10 to keep the same driver lineup, so consistency might be key for them. Giovinazzi, he was very quick all weekend, but then when it came to the race day, as has been typical in the last 2 years, Kimi kind of just outshone him. And yeah, if they can just bag a few points finishes throughout the season, they should comfortably have that 8th place, but I can't really see them going any higher because of the strength of the teams in front of them.
And on to Williams then. They were in no man's land, really. Not as bad as the Haas, but not really in that midfield scrap, although they have said numerous times Bahrain isn't really their best track. Russell finishing 14th in the end, and Latifi finishing 18th, retired in the pit lane the last few laps. Again, not an awful lot to say, really. I mean, Russell just did his thing. He was in 10th at one point, but then had to pit again, just following his strategy. And yeah, I mean, if this is their worst track, maybe Imola might suit their car a bit more. Russell almost scored points there last year, and then just suddenly vanished out the race. Can't remember what happened to that. But if they're strong in the next race, could maybe be sort of where Alfa Romeo are. Maybe that's, on their good weekends, they're around where Alfa Romeo are. On their bad weekend, they're sort of off them, but not as bad as the Haas. And Latifi, like I say, he said something about engine issues, but okay, mate, sure. And yeah, I mean, yeah, not a lot to add really to that as well.
Yeah, a bit of a quiet race for Williams yesterday, really. I think Russell did a pretty respectable job. Nothing out like extraordinary, let's say, but it was a tidy drive. He kept himself clean, and he came home in a respectable 14th place. So I don't think there's going to be many complaints about that. Latifi, on the other hand, very forgettable race for him. I really don't recall seeing him at all. And I didn't even see that he retired, probably because I was too focused on the Titanic battle up at the front. But I think Williams overall, I don't think they can be too upset about this weekend. I think just a solid weekend really for them, gathering data and information, really that will hopefully benefit them further down the line this season.
Nothing much to really say on Williams, except I didn't realize that Latifi retired for like 4 hours after the race. So yeah.
Poor guy.
Yeah, that was the same here.
He was running by
forgettable.
Mick at one stage. I don't know what actually happened to him because Mick was like 40 seconds off the next car. So
I don't know.
Latifi was. He must have had a problem or something because that wasn't on
Well,
pace.
he said he had engine issues, but I mean,
Yeah,
sure.
he was close to Russell at through the obviously it was the start of the race, but through the first I don't think he was that far behind Russell, maybe a few seconds. So yeah, he just dropped off massively, and nobody knew why.
But speaking of Haas, well, not much to talk about from one driver. Schumacher had a pretty solid race. Just again, the car is awful. And we didn't keep it in a straight line for the whole of the race. He did spin up at turn 4 on the restart. And I was thinking, oh God, that Haas really is a death trap. But he managed to keep it between the white stuff, between the white lines for the rest of the race and finish 16th. So fair enough. It's just going to be one of those seasons where Schumacher just goes completely under the radar, which is probably a good thing for him with, amount of expectations and pressure on him. If he just gets his head down, I'm sure he's learning a hell of a lot. And the team seem pretty pleased with him. And that's the best he can do, like Williams, if you go back to recent times, Williams in 2019, just completely off the pace. And as long as what Russell did, just ahead of your teammate, I'm sure people at Ferrari know how good he's doing. And then, we'll get on to Mazepin. I mean, the bar was really in hell after his 2 spins in qualifying, and he literally lasted 2 corners, which I think could not have been any funnier. At the time, I actually thought it was Schumacher, so I was like, oh, that's not ideal, but it was Verstappen, and that was quite funny to me. I mean, just wow, just he just no. It's just, I mean, what can you say? There's no
Yeah,
one's
you're a bit lost for
defending him.
words. There's not
No,
much
I'm
to
just,
say after crashing
yeah.
out 3
I
quarters
just
into
like,
your F1 debut. There
no,
isn't
I know.
much to say, is
There's no
there?
amount of defending. There's no amount of sympathy or like unironic, yeah, like ironically liking him. No, it's just bad.
Mazepin had the shortest debut of any driver since 2002. If you want a fun fact, I think
I
it's
mean,
like
that just
25
sums it up,
seconds.
to be honest.
Yeah, very
Yeah,
brief,
25
wasn't it?
seconds
Oh,
or so. Yeah,
I think probably the
thing is,
worst
it wasn't
debut
even a
I've seen.
rookie crash. This was more than a rookie crash. He genuinely just dropped it. Like, fair enough, Raikkonen and Leclerc in practice did it, but theirs was nowhere near as bad if you watched the onboards. Like, Mazepin's was just genuinely
if you
terrible.
Just plant
yeah,
the
and if
throttle
you watch
way
the
too
onboard
early.
and listen, and you listen to the car, he almost hit Latifi. The sort of like had to swerve out the way, coming on the apex of turn 2, and then was just like he was having wheel spin throughout the entire exit of turn 2 onto turn 3, and he lost it so late on. It's just like what? Like he's what? It's just like
Yeah, he
can't believe
claimed he was.
I can't believe
Yeah.
that just happened.
He claimed he was making a void in action for a driver in front, which was quickly
No,
disproven on social media
I think he
shortly
went back on that.
afterwards.
I think he went back on
Yeah.
that.
Oh, did he?
No,
Okay, fair enough. But it's and I
It's
was
kind of like
thinking,
Vettel saying when Vettel on the team radio said like he was blaming Ocon, and afterwards,
I think he was heating the moment
he was like,
stuff.
actually, yeah, he kind of just like looking for reasons that weren't there because it was a bit embarrassing, as he said. It's probably one of his worst days in motorsport.
yeah, I think moving on to the real sort of notable drive in Haas team, which didn't last 3
Well,
corners.
the only driver of the
Yeah,
Haas team.
yeah. Schumacher, did a really tidy job, I'd say, for an F1 debut. Even though he had that spin on the restart, that Haas does seem like an absolute dog to drive. So apart from that spin, he did a tidy job. Really, I don't think he wasn't really doing much, but it's a big learning curve for him this year. I don't think he's going to be really making any major overtakes or battles with anyone. It does seem that Haas is well and truly plumb last by quite a long way. But yeah, I think Schumacher, he did what he could really with that car. But yeah.
Yeah, Schumacher kind of did the maximum you can expect. He impressed me. It's hard to impress when you're in the car that slow, but throughout practice and qualifying, he kept it clean, just was clocking the miles, learning the car, learning how to handle these beasts. And he had that one error in the race, which thankfully for him, because Haas is so far back, it didn't really have much ramifications on his overall result. And it's kind of annoying that we know Mick's a second season driver, but we can't judge how good his first season is because the Haas car is way off the pace, even of Williams. And at the end of the day, they're not going to be moving forward throughout the season because they're not going to develop this car. And so all Mick can do is shine against Mazepin, and he's not exactly a high benchmark, as we've seen in Bahrain, if you're going to be lasting 25 seconds into a race.
Yeah, a similar situation to Russell a few years back in his first year in F1, I'd say.
Russell's stuck in no man's land this year. I didn't mention Russell, but he's literally stuck in because they're clear of Haas, but they're not Alfa Romeo. It's such a big step forward.
It's a bit frustrating, really, I suppose, for them drivers because they're not being able to showcase their true raw ability fighting other cars near them.
Yeah, and with that as well, I mean, Mick was close to joining Alfa Romeo, and now I think, oh God, why couldn't he have joined Alfa Romeo? Because he would have been at least be able to show his pace compared to a respectable driver and around the points. And now he's stuck at the bottom of the grid. But
I wouldn't write Haas up for 2022.
His talent, his talent will shine through. There's no doubt. But that has been our review and our reaction to the Bahrain Grand Prix. I do want to say a thank you to Dill, who has stood in for Nat today. Came in a last-minute cameo sub, George Russell-esque, last year at Bahrain. And we've enjoyed having you, so thank you. And make sure you subscribe. We'll be posting our Bahrain, our Imola preview a couple of days before, which will be in 2 or 3 weeks time, I think. It's a bit of a wait. But make sure you have the notifications on as well. Leave a like on the video if you have enjoyed it. And thanks for watching.